Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This time I'd like to call to order a special call meeting of Henry County Board of Commissioners on today, July the 2nd, 2013 at 10 a.m. At this time, I will entertain a motion to accept the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Moved by District 3, second by District 2. All in favor? 4-0. Before we get into the item on the agenda, I'd like to make a couple of comments, and basically these are for the ones that are watching this on TV or via the internet. This event is a sponsored event, but it's not sponsored by Henry County. It's basically a private event. Henry County has no funds invested. Any of Henry County employees that may be working at this facility will be paid for by the sponsor, and Henry County has absolutely no money, time, or anything else invested in it. We have leased the property to the Rodeo Association in order to put this event on. Just want to be sure that everybody understands this, because a lot of people get confused on it. This is not a Henry County sponsored event. Henry County has no funds in it. Taxpayers not paying any money for the event whatsoever. Having said that, I'm going to move on to the item on the agenda. The item is on the agenda for Henry County Rodeo Association for the 4th of July Festival. This agreement was originally approved on June the 18th of 2013 by this board. Paragraph 5 of the agreement addresses comprehensive general liability insurance. It requires the Rodeo Association to purchase a $4 million liability insurance policy for the property, injury, and damage. The Rodeo Association has obtained liability policies from various vendors who will be at this event. The fireworks or pyrotechnic vendor has a $2 million liability policy. The inflatables vendor has a $1 million liability policy. The alcohol vendor has a $1 million liability policy. Now, the Rodeo Association has a $2 million policy. One could say that the $2 million for the rodeo and the $2 million for the pyrotech is equal to the $4 million. And I would say that in most cases, 2 and 2 do make 4. However, in this case, the board approved a motion that was made for the vendor to have a $4 million liability coverage. At this point in time, I'd like to ask that before we ask for a motion, I'd like to ask if anyone in the audience here has any questions at all. Okay, now when we'll move forward, I'm going to move forward with it. We have our motions are possible to amend paragraph 5 as follows. Licensees shall maintain and keep in effect valid and collectible comprehensive general liability insurance in the amount of not less than. Now here's where we go. We're either going with the $4 million that was put in place at the time or $2 million. Using the aggregate of the 2 plus 2 makes the 4. Combined single limit for bodily injury, property damage, and the licensee shall also obtain liability insurance policies from the following vendors. Polytechnic, $2 million. Inflatables, $1 million. Alcohol vendor, $1 million, then plus his $2 million aggregate. All such policies of liability insurance shall be in the name of Henry County Board of Commissioners or Henry County, Georgia, as an additional insured. I don't think that that item would be a problem on that. So at this point in time, I'm going to ask. Excuse me. Yes, sir.
Can I make one clarification?
You certainly may.
Okay. And Jay Mercer with the Strawn Insurance Company is here to help clarify if I'm wrong. I handed out a worksheet, or a schedule rather, that shows the coverages much to what you indicated.
Yes, sir.
The fireworks is, as you indicated, the coverage of $2 million from American Pyrotechnics. And then down below where the arrow goes to the events policy from Henry County Rodeo is what you had indicated as the $4 million. Thank you. The alcohol being provided by the Rodeo Association is $2 million, but the general liability policy will not step in on alcohol. Alcohol is a totally separate item, so there's $2 million worth of alcohol coverage. The inflatables have a $1 million from the Mr. Moonwalk Entertainment, which is the policy you were referencing for $1 million, and it also will drag in the $2 million policy that the Rodeos Association is purchasing as a general liability, giving it a total of $3 million. So what you would have is $4 million for fireworks, $2 million for alcohol, and $3 million for inflatable, where fireworks and inflatables are using the same general liability policy. The only issue that would come into play is if you did have $4 million of liability claims under fireworks, the inflatables would not have any general liability because it would be consumed through one or the other events. So the $2 million, again, is a single $2 million policy under the Henry Rodeo Association commercial liability where the arrows go down to. And therefore, that's the use of the general liability policy to get to $4 million or to $3 million on fireworks or rodeo, on the fireworks or inflatables. And again, alcohol stands on its own. As I understand it, the host liquor liability policy cannot be attached with a general liability. The policy itself has to stand on its own, and coverage itself and whatever amounts required would come under that specific policy. As I said, Jay Mercer with Strawn Insurance Company here, who is the agent for the Rodeo Association, can answer any further questions, or I'll try to clarify. I've got a nod of the head from him that what I just said is correct, so what you have in front of you is what it is.
Okay, my question then would be to the board, does anybody have any questions of Mr. Mercer? Mr. Mercer, would you please step to the microphone, please? State your name and address for the record.
Jay Mercer.
An address?
848 East Lake Road, McDonough.
Thank you.
My questions, Mr. Mercer, is that one of the things that, just so the public also understands, is that it appears that the insurance coverage increased, and that was by practice pricing the vendor out. So can you explain how many, when you go to underwrite a policy or shop a policy, how many people have 1 and 2 million, how many vendors are available at the $2 million range that you can go shop it with?
The majority of carriers are only going to provide $1 million, $2 million. That's where their comfort zone is. Not saying that the higher limits are obtainable, but there's a lot more underwriting that goes into it. The pricing becomes much, much more expensive. It's not simply going from 1 million to 4 million is 4 times the amount. It may be 6 to 8 to 10 times the amount, because all of a sudden you're putting that carrier in with much more exposure than the $1 million per occurrence, 2 million aggregate, which for a small vendor makes it very difficult and just not price capable of purchasing.
So when you go to a 4 million, sometimes they can add provisions like all individuals, all vendors have to have the
Absolutely.
coverage, versus if it's a smaller amount, a lot of times they will just incur, and they don't
But
require
they'll
the
accept
individual vendors.
that extra exposure at $1 million because it's not as great a exposure. But
So the kettle corn guy would be required to have $4 million too?
yes, yes,
Okay, and that's probably going to price them out of the marketplace.
absolutely.
The other question is, because I was worried about the unintended consequences, because, I mean, obviously, fireworks is inherently, I can understand why you need to make sure we have the risk management looked at. But we have other events like the Windy Hill Kiwanis Club, do a fair every year, and I know you've been somewhat involved in that in the past. Would this change impact potentially that in the future as well? I mean, could the Kiwanis Club swing that change?
We'll really have to reevaluate our stance on that, and it will really certainly cut into our profit that we make off the fair to give back into the community. But it's certainly going to have an impact on us as far as our overhead. If we stay with these measures in place that the county was wanting, this $4 million, all nonprofit organizations that do have activities on county grounds are going to be impacted, and they're going to find that their cost to put on these nonprofit events, whether there's 10 or 100 participants or 10,000 like the fireworks show, they're all going to see some huge expenses right up front with insurance, probably keeping those events from happening.
Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Anybody? I mean,
I'd like to make a comment, if you don't mind. So what you're saying basically is that one shoe fits all, because I know I'm a general contractor,
Okay.
commercial only. I pay a lot more for the guys that work on the roof than I do for the guys that work on the ground. I
Right.
pay a lot more for the guys that work on the ground than I do for the ladies that work in the office. So are you telling me that one size fits all? In other words, our softball or baseball events that would have not even near the liability that you would have with a pyrotechnical show would be forced to pay the same? I think that the board could set up a certain amount and put it in play based on the liability that's in there. I disagree with the fact that everybody would have to pay the same. I certainly don't pay the same. I know my insurance coverages run me close to $500,000 a year for my business, and that's my umbrella and all the other things that I do.
but
So-
fairs are pretty high risk, I believe. I mean, maybe, I
Well,
don't
we're
know.
not talking about everything, though, Brian.
Well,
You
you
mentioned
bring up a
everything.
good
You said,
point.
okay, you said the fair, but you also said, other events that happen, which is the baseball, the softball, the Little League.
But currently, I'm unaware of any structure that the county has in place to quantify or justify what that exposure of event as to what level of liability it needs to carry.
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure that has ever been established, and that's kind of where we are right now.
Exactly.
Now, you bring up another point. You have a general liability for your construction business.
Right.
It is an annual contract, 12-month policy, as in most business owners' policies are. We're talking about special event, one-shot, one-time policies that are, from the insurance carrier standpoint, a little more restrictive because they only know that they're going to have this business for one day, and it doesn't give them a snapshot or a time frame of a period where over time they prove their worthiness of not having claims in that situation.
So what you're telling me, there's no data that tells you what the risk would be for having a fireworks show, that you have to assume that it's going to either be all or nothing? I mean, that doesn't make a lot
Most
sense.
of the time, when you purchase a special event policy,
Right.
a routine special event, it's going to be in a certain price range. That price range anywhere from $500 to $2,000, depending on the event and the circumstances surrounding it. But that's at about $1 million mark. When you start throwing in the variables of $4 million and up, insurance companies start asking a lot more questions. Their underwriting restrictions start to kick in place, and it becomes much more difficult to satisfy their requirements for that $4 million amount or those higher limits.
I understand that. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions?
I do want to ask our legal counsel, one of the things, because I know, and Rita, I appreciate you going over this is a sponsored event, it's not really us, because I feel like I'm playing the part of Commissioner Warren Holder with the history lesson kind of in the past. I know we were doing this event, and then it started to become hard for the county to raise the funds, because to do an event like this is probably 15 to 20 grand at a minimum. And then, so we tried to outsource it, because during the downturn in the economy, we had a lot of trouble raising the funds to do this. And I kind of like going outside of the county from, we don't have to come up with the money, but also because it does give us some risk protection. And that's what, I know we have, is it a hold harmless clause, or we have contracts that the vendor has to sign before we do this? So is it better if, from a liability standpoint, to have a third party run the event versus us from a liability, or us running it with our own insurance?
That's a good question.
Because when I look at, we have $4 million of insurance, and then if we have it looks like 2 to 3 or 4, depending upon what unfortunately could happen. We're actually carrying, they would have to go through that $2 to $4 million before it came even, and who knows if we even have standing for it even being named in the lawsuit. But that's what I just want to get clarification. Is it better to go through a third party versus us?
I think it depends on the level of control that will be asserted at the event. Certainly, I think if the county were sponsoring it, if you overcame the hurdle of the finances and the budgetary issues that led to it being not funded by the county in the past, the county certainly will have, I guess, more of ability, just as being a bigger entity, to have more control over the crowd control, the police, the public safety component, I think, just because we're the county, more so than a private vendor would. It's hard to answer that question per se, but I will say that with respect to the facility rental agreement that is being amended, the paragraph 5 that's being amended, there is a hold harmless clause in that agreement, Commissioner Preston. There's an indemnification clause such that if the county were ever found to be liable for a claim, and if a claimant was able to get through all those other hurdles, or if there was a mass catastrophic event, God forbid, and if they made it through all those hurdles and the county was determined to be liable, then there is a hold harmless clause where the county will be authorized to go back to the private event sponsor to be indemnified, so that the citizens can be indemnified for that loss.
I'd like to clarify one thing. I had not seen the policy from the inflatable company, and I just got a copy this morning and just recently, and it turns out that this is here, what I put on the screen, this is Mr. Moonwalk Entertainment, this is their certificate of insurance, and you will see that certificate holder down here is Henry County Board of Commissioners, and where I had put it was a $1 million, which is what I thought it was. It is a $2 million aggregate and $1 million per occurrence.
Okay.
So that changes the coverage, if you would, from 3 to 4 based on a $2 million versus the $1 million.
On the inflatables?
Inflatables, yes, sir. So that's just one change I wanted to bring to your attention, which is better, more, not less.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right, we have, what the board has to decide is, do you want to, what amount you want to put into the insurance, as I'm going to read it again, the amendment, the licensee shall maintain and keep in effect valid and collectible comprehensive general liability insurance, and the amount of that is not less than. And we have to fill in the blanks. You guys have to fill in the blanks. So that's what's on the floor. I'd like to accept a motion and put the amount in your motion, please.
I'll make a motion that we pass the resolution that requires $2 million of general liability from the pyrotechnics company, $2 million from the inflatables company, $2 million from the sponsor of the event, and I believe, and then $2 million from the alcohol sales vendor.
I need to make a statement before we get a second on that. I was just given a notice that it should be a resolution of Henry County Board of Commissioners for the purpose of approving the amended facility rental agreement with Henry County Rodeo Association for the 4th of July Festival. We'll get that in for the record. And we have a motion on the floor to set the amount, change the amount for the Rodeo Association to $2 million. Do I hear a second? I have a motion from District 2, a second from District 5. All in favor? Passes 4-0. Moving on, we've got just a couple of quick announcements. Second is second item on the agenda is a discussion regarding a called meeting on July the 11th at 6:30 to consider and discuss SPLOST 4 project lists that were approved by the SPLOST 4 committee. It is my understanding that there are about 20 agenda items for July the 16th, the regularly scheduled meeting. The board needs time to discuss and review the SPLOST 4 project list, as there are a number of deadlines that we must have in order to get the issuance on the November ballot. Having a call meeting dedicated to this matter would be highly recommended. I would like to know at this time, if you can, the chair as well as the vice chair have already stated that we can be here. And I'll start with District 1. Would you be able to make it that time? District 3, District 2.
6:30, Mr. Vice Chairman. I think it's the requested time, suggested time.
Oh, okay.
6:30 July.
You know, this is just my second time behind the microphone, so
No, it's not. We didn't give you that information. It was our fault.
I'm just trying to make sure that we had everybody that would be able to do it. So, okay, it seems like we do. Okay, at this time, we don't have anything else on the agenda? All right. I'd like to close this meeting. Thank everybody for coming. Everything's been cleared up. As far as I can tell, it's clear. And I'd like to have a motion that we dismiss. So, motion by District 3, second. I actually got a second by District. Motion by District 2, second by District 3. All in favor? We are dismissed. Thank you.